The gangway swayed under my boots that morning, steel cables groaning against the dock pylons. Should have taken that as a sign, but I was thinking about bioluminescent squid, not about how the Nereid would change everything I thought I knew about the ocean. 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten the call from the Marine Biology Institute. Routine documentation job, they said. 8-person team heading to the Mariana Trench to study deep-sea organisms. My specialty, photographing creatures that made their own light in the absolute darkness 7 miles down. Good money for 6 weeks' work. The Nereid sat low in the water, her hull painted that industrial gray-green that all research vessels wore. 230 feet of reinforced steel and specialized equipment. I'd worked smaller boats, rustier ones too. This one had money behind her. Clean welds, fresh paint on the railings. Equipment bolted down proper instead of jury-rigged with zip ties and hope. I hauled my gear up the gangway. Camera cases first, then the specialized pressure housings that'd keep the electronics working at 36,000 feet. My back already ached from the weight. Getting old at 32. That's what desk work does to you, makes you soft. Tucker Glass? The voice came from above. Charles Ramos stood at the rail, clipboard in hand. Big man, maybe 6'2", built like he'd spent more time wrestling equipment than sitting in offices. Gray touched his temples, but his grip was firm when I climbed aboard and shook his hand. That's me. Welcome aboard. You're bunking in cabin 4, port side. Briefing's at 1400 hours. He checked something off his list. Military time and efficiency. Former Navy, I figured. They all moved the same way. Rest of the science team's already settling in. Science team. That's what they called us. Like we were some special unit instead of 8 people crammed on a boat for 6 weeks. I'd met worse crews. Hell, I'd been on shrimp boats where half the guys couldn't read. At least here, everyone had degrees. The Nereid's interior smelled like diesel and fresh paint over old steel. My cabin was a closet with 2 bunks and a porthole. Clean, though. Sheets that didn't smell like the last guy's sweat. I stowed my gear and went to find coffee. The galley hummed with that first day energy, everyone sizing each other up, being polite. I recognized the types. Couple of grad students trying to look professional, older researchers who'd done this before, one guy in a lab coat who probably shouldn't have worn it to breakfast. That was Jackson Hall. I didn't know his name yet, just noticed how he held his coffee mug with both hands like it might escape. Thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the overhead lights. He watched everyone while pretending to read something on his tablet. The archaeologist sat alone near the windows. Stephanie Santiago, I'd seen her name on the crew manifest. Long, dark hair pulled back practical. None of that loose-flowing nonsense you couldn't wear around machinery. She had maps spread across her table, real paper ones, marking something with a pencil. I grabbed coffee, strong and bitter, perfect boat coffee, and found an empty corner. Watched the others filter in. Beverly Sharp, small and nervous, kept adjusting her glasses while she talked to another researcher. Alexander Blair moved like someone comfortable on boats, checking the galley's exits without seeming to. Storm Park came in last, every movement precise, like she'd rehearsed walking through doorways. The technician, Christian Armstrong, looked about 12 years old under his scruffy blonde hair, tool belt already on at breakfast. He'd probably sleep in it. 8 people who'd spend the next 6 weeks trying not to kill each other in a metal tube. I'd worked with worse. We left port that afternoon. I stood on deck watching San Diego shrink behind us, tasting salt spray and diesel exhaust. The Pacific stretched out endless and blue. Somewhere below, 7 miles straight down, creatures swam in permanent midnight. That's what I'd come to find. Charles ran the briefing like a military operation. Charts and schedules, watch rotations, equipment protocols. We'd reached the study site in 4 days, deployment schedules for the remote cameras and sampling equipment, standard deep-sea research stuff. Questions? Nobody had questions. First day, everyone wanted to look competent. 3 days out, everything felt routine. Morning coffee, equipment checks, watching the water. The Nereid had good stabilizers, barely felt the swells. I spent time in the observation lab, getting familiar with the sonar array and hydrophone setup. Beautiful equipment. The sonar could paint pictures of the seafloor in perfect detail. The hydrophones could pick up a shrimp clicking its claws at 5,000 feet. That's when I noticed the first anomaly. I was calibrating the sonar, making sure the readings matched what we expected for this part of the Pacific. The seafloor here should have been smooth sediment, maybe some volcanic formations. Typical abyssal plain geology. The display showed something else. Structures, massive ones, angular shapes that sediment doesn't make, arranged in patterns that geology doesn't create. They covered maybe 2 square kilometers of seafloor, edges too sharp, spacing too regular. I checked the equipment, ran diagnostics, everything working perfect. The hydrophones picked up something too, not the random noise of deep sea life, clicks and whistles and the groan of water pressure. This had rhythm, pattern, low-frequency pulses that repeated every 93 seconds, like something broadcasting, like something talking. I documented everything, screenshots, audio recordings, equipment settings. 3 hours of data that said the same thing. Something down there wasn't natural. The briefing room felt smaller with all 8 of us crammed around the table. I'd prepared my presentation careful, just facts, no speculation. Let the data speak. I've detected some unusual readings we should investigate, I started, bringing up the sonar images on the main screen. Charles leaned forward. Others shifted in their seats. The structures filled the display. Even on the screen they looked wrong. Too organized, too deliberate. These formations appear to be artificial. I kept my voice neutral, scientific. The angles and spacing don't match any known geological processes. Additionally, we're detecting acoustic patterns, thermal vents. Charles cut me off. We're near a known vent field. They create all sorts of interference. I pulled up the acoustic data. Sir, the patterns are too regular, every 93 seconds, like clockwork. Thermal vents don't. They do all kinds of things at these depths. His tone said the discussion was over. We're here to study bioluminescence, not chase sonar ghosts. Good catch on the monitoring, but let's stay focused on our mission. He moved on to the next agenda item, equipment rotation schedules. I sat down, face hot. Around the table, the others had gone very still. Beverly stared at her notepad. Alexander studied the ceiling. Storm's expression showed nothing at all. Only Stephanie watched me. Her eyes held something I couldn't read. The meeting dragged on. Sampling protocols, dive schedules, data backup procedures. My sonar images disappeared from the screen, replaced by spreadsheets. But those structures stayed in my head, those patterns, that rhythm. When Charles finally dismissed us, I packed up slow. Let the others file out first. No point making a scene. Tucker. Stephanie stood by the door. Everyone else had gone. Yeah? She glanced down the corridor, then stepped back inside. Closed the door. Your readings. I need to talk to you about them. Charles made it pretty clear. Charles is wrong. She pulled out her phone, showed me a screen full of data. I've been tracking similar signals for 3 weeks, started before we left port. They're not thermal vents. The patterns on her screen matched mine. Same frequency, same intervals. Then what are they? She looked at the door again, lowered her voice. Something's responding to us. Every time we broadcast active sonar, the patterns change. Like, she stopped, shook her head. Like it's answering. My coffee suddenly tasted like metal. Who else knows about this? Just us. I tried showing Charles last week. Got the same response you did. She put her phone away. Be careful who you trust on this boat, Tucker. Not everyone wants these signals documented. She left before I could ask what that meant. The next 2 days I watched the others. Really watched. Started noticing things. Beverly Sharp practically ran away when she saw me coming down a corridor. Just turned and went the other way, like she'd forgotten something urgent in the opposite direction. Alexander Blair used to take his coffee breaks on the observation deck. Now he stayed in the lab, hunched over his workstation whenever I walked by. Storm Park had conversations that died the second I got close. Her and Christian Armstrong talking low near the equipment lockers. They saw me and split up fast, Christian fumbling with his tools, Storm checking her watch like she was late for something. Even meal times got weird. I'd enter the galley and conversations would skip like a scratched record. Everyone suddenly interested in their food. The observation deck emptied out whenever I showed up. Used to be the popular spot, best windows on the ship. Now I had it to myself, just me and the endless Pacific. They knew something, all of them. Something about those signals, those structures. Something they didn't want me finding out. The sediment cores came up on schedule that morning, winch motors groaning against 4,000 meters of cable. I worked the collection arm while Beverly monitored the pressure readings, neither of us talking much. Standard procedure: extract the core, transfer to preservation tubes, log the GPS coordinates. Done it 100 times before. But when I cracked open the third core, something pink caught my eye in the gray mud. Fresh tissue. Not fossilized, not decomposed. Fresh. I grabbed the forceps and extracted a piece about the size of my thumbnail. The texture felt wrong, too firm, too structured for something that had been sitting under 600 atmospheres of pressure. At those depths, organic material turns to paste in hours. This looked like I'd just cut it from a living organism. "Beverly," I said, holding up the sample. "You seeing this?" She glanced over from her station, then did a double take. Her clipboard hit the deck. "That can't be right," she said, adjusting her glasses. "The pressure alone would..." "Yeah, I know what the pressure would do." I placed the tissue in a sterile container, hands steady despite the adrenaline spike. But here it is. The next two cores yielded more fragments. Different textures, different colors. One almost translucent with a blue tinge. Another that looked like muscle fiber but with a crystalline structure running through it. I filled 7 sample containers before we finished the collection run. Back in the lab, I started with basic microscopy. The moment I got the first tissue under magnification, my breath caught. The cellular structure made no sense. Normal cells have predictable patterns: walls, nuclei, organelles arranged in ways that follow the rules of biology. These cells looked like someone had rewritten those rules. The walls weren't just walls. They had a lattice structure that seemed to shift under different wavelengths of light. The nuclei, if that's what they were, pulsed with their own rhythm, synchronized across the entire sample. I switched to the electron microscope for better resolution. At 10,000 times magnification, the impossible became undeniable. These weren't contaminated samples or degraded tissue. They were intact, functioning cells of a type I'd never seen in 20 years of marine biology. The genetic sequencer took 3 hours to process the first sample. I watched the data stream across the monitor, expecting to see familiar base pairs arranging into readable code. Instead, the machine threw error after error. The sequences didn't match anything in the database. Not fish, not invertebrate, not even the weird extremophiles we sometimes found near thermal vents. I ran it again. Same result. The genetic code used patterns that shouldn't exist, combinations that violated basic biochemistry. My hands shook as I prepared the documentation. Screenshots of the cellular structures, the sequencing data, photographs of the original tissue samples. This was career-defining stuff. Proof of an entirely new branch of life, adapted to pressures that should crush any biological material. I'd just hit send on the preliminary report when every screen in the lab went dark. Not just dark, dead. The hum of electronics that formed the background noise of shipboard life cut out all at once. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. "Communications array is down." Christian's voice came over the intercom. "Complete failure. We've lost satellite uplink." My report hadn't gone through. I tried the backup systems, then the emergency beacon. Nothing. Every method of contacting the outside world had failed simultaneously. That doesn't happen by accident on a research vessel. We had redundancies for our redundancies. "Tucker." Jackson's voice made me turn. He stood in the lab doorway, those wire-rimmed glasses catching the emergency lights. "I need those samples." "These are my specimens," I said. "I collected them. I'm analyzing them. And I'm expedition leader." He stepped into the lab coat pristine even in the red lighting. "The samples are contaminated. Drilling fluid corruption happens sometimes with deep cores. Drilling fluid doesn't create new cellular structures. It does when combined with pressure anomalies and chemical reactions." He held out his hand. "The samples, Tucker." I knew that tone, the same dismissive certainty Charles had used about the sonar signals. But this time I had physical evidence, genetic data that couldn't be explained away as equipment malfunction. "I need to complete my analysis," I said. "Your analysis is complete. Contamination by drilling compounds. I'll note it in the expedition log." His hand stayed extended. "This is a direct order." Beverly appeared behind him in the doorway. Alexander, too. Neither would meet my eyes. I handed over the samples. What choice did I have? But I'd already backed up the data to 3 different drives, including one hidden in my camera gear. Jackson could take the physical specimens, but the genetic sequences and cellular images stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The emergency lights had switched back to normal power after an hour, Christian claiming he'd found a loose connection in the main array. Nobody believed him, but nobody challenged it either. Around 2 in the morning, I made my way to the security station. The Nereid had cameras covering most critical areas, standard safety protocol for research vessels. The monitors showed empty corridors, the occasional crew member on night watch. Then movement caught my eye on the aft deck camera. 3 figures in dive gear working around one of the submersibles. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the contrast. Alexander and Storm, with Christian running the winch controls. They weren't scheduled for any dives. I'd checked the logs before coming up here. I switched camera feeds, following their preparations. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they'd done this before. Many times before. The submersible launched without running lights, disappearing into the black water like it had never been there. The dive lasted 4 hours. I watched every minute, switching between exterior cameras and the submersible's tracking beacon on the navigation display. They descended to the coordinates where I'd found the tissue samples, held position for 3 hours, then surfaced. When the submersible came back up, they had collection containers, big ones. Whatever they'd retrieved barely fit through the recovery hatch. I recorded everything, using my phone when I couldn't access the security system's recording function. The way they moved those containers, careful, almost reverent. These weren't standard specimens. They knew exactly what they were collecting, exactly where to find it. The next morning, I found Stephanie on the observation deck. She stood at the rail, staring at the horizon like she could see through the water to whatever lay below. "I know about the night dives," I said. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. "Coffee's still warm if you want some." I poured a cup, joined her at the rail. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, giving no hint of what we'd been circling above. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the dives? 2 weeks." She finally looked at me. "About what's down there? That's a different question." "The tissue samples aren't contaminated." She cut me off. "Jackson knows it. Charles knows it. Hell, even Beverly knows it, though she'd never admit it out loud. So what is it? What are we actually studying here?" Stephanie pulled out her phone, swiped to a folder I recognized, the same encryption setup she'd used for the acoustic data. The image she showed me made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my mouth. Sonar imaging, but at a resolution I'd never seen from our equipment. The structures I'd noticed before were just the beginning. The image showed a complex that sprawled across the ocean floor. Geometric patterns too perfect for geology, passages and chambers arranged with obvious purpose. "This is from the original survey 3 months ago," she said. "Before you were hired. Before most of us were hired." Jesus. I studied the image, trying to process the scale. This thing is huge. 2.5 kilometers at its widest point. Average height of 40 meters with some sections reaching almost 90. She swiped to the next image, a close-up of what looked like an entrance. And it's not empty. The tissue samples suddenly made sense. Not contamination, not pressure anomalies. We'd been taking samples from something living inside that structure, something that had adapted to pressures that should kill any known organism. "The expedition was never about bioluminescence," I said. "That's the cover story. The real survey team found this thing by accident, a routine mapping project that stumbled onto something impossible." She pocketed her phone. "Instead of reporting it, they decided to study it quietly. Bring in specialists one at a time, compartmentalize the information. And the communication blackout happens every time someone tries to transmit data about the structure. Jackson has some kind of jamming system tied to keywords and file types. The official story is equipment failure, but," she shrugged, "they're hiding evidence of an underwater city. Not hiding, controlling." She turned back to the ocean. "Whatever's down there, it's not some ancient ruin. The acoustic patterns you found, those are active. The tissue samples, those are from organisms we can't classify because they shouldn't exist. This isn't archaeology, Tucker. It's first contact, and Jackson wants to manage how the world learns about it." I thought about the synchronized cellular structures, the genetic sequences that broke all the rules, not prehistoric, not abandoned, inhabited. Stephanie leaned against the observation deck rail, her knuckles white where she gripped the metal. She'd been quiet for maybe 30 seconds after telling me about first contact. But now she turned and looked me straight in the eye. "Tucker, the signals have been getting stronger since we anchored here." Her voice dropped low, like she was afraid the wind might carry her words to the wrong ears. "Not just stronger, more complex, more organized." I felt my stomach drop. "How much stronger?" "The initial pulses were maybe 0.2 watts when we first detected them. Yesterday morning they hit 12 watts. This morning," she pulled out her phone, showed me a graph that made my mouth go dry. 48 watts and climbing." The numbers hit me like cold water. 0.2 watts was barely a whisper. 48 watts from that depth, through all that water pressure. Whatever was generating those signals had serious power behind it. "The patterns changed too," she continued, swiping to another screen. "Look at this. The 93-second intervals we first recorded. They've been decreasing. 87 seconds, then 71. Now we're down to intervals of 42 seconds. My hands started trembling, not from fear exactly, but from understanding what she was telling me. "They're ramping up, like they're trying to talk to us." Stephanie finished my thought. "The acoustic patterns aren't random, Tucker. They're structured, repeating sequences with variations, mathematical progressions. It's language, or at least an attempt at language." I gripped the rail myself now, needing something solid while my brain processed this. All those hours I'd spent analyzing the hydrophone data, thinking I was documenting some natural phenomenon. But this wasn't geology making noise. This was intelligence. Something down there in that impossible structure was actively trying to communicate with us. "How long have you known?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Since yesterday afternoon. I ran the patterns through linguistic analysis software, the kind we use for decoding ancient scripts. The results," she shook her head, "non-random probability of 99.7%. These aren't echoes or interference. Something is deliberately broadcasting these signals." I thought about those tissue samples, the cells with their synchronized pulsing, the genetic sequences that broke every rule we knew, now acoustic patterns that showed intelligence. My legs felt weak. "Does Jackson know about the communication aspect?" "Oh, he knows." Her laugh had no humor in it. "He's known longer than any of us. Why do you think he's been so careful about controlling information flow?" Before I could respond, the deck lurched under our feet. Not the gentle roll of ocean swells. This was different. Wrong. The ship groaned, metal protesting against some new force. "What the hell was that?" I grabbed the rail with both hands as the deck tilted again. Stephanie's face had gone pale. She pulled up her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "The pressure sensors are going crazy. Water pressure just spiked by." Her eyes widened. "That's not possible." The ocean around us had changed. Where before we'd had normal Pacific swells, now the water moved in patterns that made no sense. Currents swirled in perfect circles around our position. The surface itself seemed to pulse, rising and falling in rhythm with something deep below. "Get inside," Stephanie said, but I was already moving, following her through the hatch into the main corridor. The ship's alarm started wailing. General quarters, all hands to stations. But under that familiar sound, I heard something else. A deep thrumming that came up through the deck plates, through the hull itself. The same frequency as those acoustic patterns we'd been tracking. We burst into the observation lab to find chaos. Every screen showed impossible readings. Sonar painted a picture that made my blood freeze. The ocean floor around us was moving. Not shifting like an earthquake, moving with purpose. Jesus Christ. Alexander Blair stood at the main console, his usual calm completely shattered. "The structures they're opening." I pushed forward to see the display. The geometric patterns we'd mapped, those perfect angles and corridors. They were changing. Sections that had appeared solid were sliding apart like massive doors. And from those openings, movement. Storm Park announced from the hydrophone station, voice mechanical with forced control. Multiple contacts ascending. Large, very large. The sonar returns showed forms rising from the structure, not debris or geological formations. These things moved with deliberate motion, spiraling upward through the water column. The computer struggled to assign size estimates. The readings kept jumping between 50 meters and 500, like the objects were somehow interfering with the sonar itself. "Where's Jackson?" I spun around, searching for him in the chaos. "Command bridge," Beverly Sharp stuttered from her corner, clutching a tablet like a life preserver. With Charles and... The lights cut out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. But in that moment of darkness, I'd seen something through the porthole. A glow from beneath the water. Not our lights reflecting back. Something else. Christian Armstrong's voice crackled over the intercom. All hands, all hands. We have multiple breaches in the lower equipment bay. Pressure seals are... Static swallowed his words. The deck lurched again, harder this time. I heard metal shrieking somewhere below us. Through the confusion, one thought crystallized. They were responding to us. Whatever lived in that structure had decided we'd crossed a line. "Everyone out!" Charles Ramos's voice boomed from the doorway. Our commander looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last minute. "Abandon the lab, move to..." Jackson Hall appeared behind him, and what I saw in his face made everything else fade to background noise. No surprise, no confusion, just grim determination and something that might have been satisfaction. "Dr. Hall," I started forward. "What's happening? What are those things?" He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with steady hands. Too steady for someone whose ship was under attack by unknown entities. "Mr. Glass, I need you to listen very carefully. We don't have much time." The hull groaned again. Somewhere below, I heard the distinct sound of metal tearing. "The communication blackout wasn't an equipment failure," Jackson said, speaking fast but clear. "We've been dark by design. The Institute..." He paused, choosing words. "Let's say our funding comes from sources beyond marine biology." My brain stuttered, trying to process this while the ship shuddered around us. "Government? Defense Advanced Research Projects. Deep Ocean Anomaly Division." He pulled a sealed envelope from inside his jacket. "We've been monitoring electromagnetic anomalies in ocean trenches for 15 years. When the initial survey found this structure, certain protocols activated." Stephanie made a sound beside me. Anger or recognition, I couldn't tell. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. "You knew exactly what we'd find down here." "We suspected. The tissue samples confirmed it. Living technology, Mr. Glass. Biological systems that interface with manufactured structures. The applications for defense, for advancement of human knowledge." The ship lurched violently to starboard. Through the porthole, I saw the water itself glowing now, phosphorescent streams of light spiraling up from the depths. "You were ordered to extract samples," Stephanie's voice cut like a blade, "before attempting communication, before assessing threat levels." Jackson's mask finally slipped. "Personnel safety was always secondary to sample acquisition. I'm sorry, but you all signed very specific contracts. The confidentiality clauses..." "We're expendable," I finished. The truth of it hit like ice water. This whole expedition, we're not researchers, we're collection agents for a black op. The entities down there have technology that could revolutionize energy, medicine, space travel. His eyes blazed with fervor now. One successful extraction could advance human civilization by centuries. That's worth any risk. "Tell that to them," Alexander shouted, pointing at the sonar screen. The forms rising from below had reached the midwater column. The computer gave up trying to calculate size. The display just showed error where the measurements should be. But we could see them on multiple sensors now. Massive, organic but structured, like living machines or mechanical organisms. The distinction didn't matter anymore. "They're not hostile," I heard myself say. Everyone turned to stare at me, but the pieces were clicking together in my head. The pressure changes, the defensive positioning. They're not attacking, they're defending. "Defending what?" Charles demanded. "Their home, their territory." I thought about those synchronized cells, the mathematical patterns in their communications. We came here with extraction equipment, took samples without permission. How would we react if someone started cutting pieces off our cities? The deck plates buckled upward near the stern. Metal shrieked and tore. The hull integrity alarms joined the cacophony of warnings already blaring. "Pressure differential expanding," Storm reported with eerie calm. "Hull stress approaching critical thresholds." That's when I understood what they were doing. These entities, this intelligence, they weren't using weapons in any conventional sense. They were using the ocean itself, manipulating water pressure like we'd manipulate tools, creating pressure differentials that could crush steel like paper. "Abandon ship," Charles commanded. "All hands to life." The explosion came from below, not fire and combustion, implosion. the horrible sound of something collapsing under impossible pressure. Through the chaos, I heard Christian's final transmission. "Equipment bay compromised. The extraction gear is—" Silence. The intercom went dead. "Christian!" Beverly screamed. Alexander Blair was already moving, heading for the lower decks despite the obvious danger. Storm grabbed his arm, trying to hold him back, but Alexander shook free. "The backup generators are down there," he said. "If we lose those, you'll die," Storm stated. No emotion, just fact. Alexander's jaw set. "Then I died trying to save the ship." He disappeared through the hatch before anyone could stop him. Storm moved to follow, but another impact sent us all sprawling. When I pulled myself up, I saw something through the porthole that burned into my memory forever. One of the entities had surfaced near our stern. Not completely, just enough to give us a glimpse. Bioluminescent patterns raced across what might have been skin or might have been metal. Impossible to tell where biology ended and technology began. The size, my brain refused to process the scale. It dwarfed our ship. "Jesus," Charles whispered. "Dear God." The entity's lights pulsed in sequence. The same mathematical patterns Stephanie had decoded. It was still trying to communicate, even as it defended itself, even as it crushed our ship for the violation we'd committed. Another implosion from below. The deck tilted sharply forward. "Blair." Storm actually showed emotion now, fighting against Charles, who held him back from the hatch. "Alexander." But we all knew. The sounds from the equipment bay told the story. The extraction equipment hadn't just failed. It had been targeted, crushed with surgical precision, and anyone near it. I grabbed the console as the ship listed further. Through the chaos, through the fear, one thought dominated. We'd found something incredible, something that could have changed everything, and our first act had been to try to steal from it. The entity's lights pulsed again. The pattern was different now, slower, almost mournful. They'd tried to talk to us, and we'd answered with theft. The emergency beacon controls were right there on the bridge console. I'd used them 100 times before. Standard distress signals, position reports, weather updates. Never thought I'd be trying to talk to something living 2 miles down. I keyed in a simple sequence on the sonar. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Basic as it gets. The lights below changed immediately. The pattern broke, reformed into something new. 3 answering pulses came back through the hull, strong enough to rattle the coffee mugs in their holders. "Tucker, what are you doing?" Charles gripped the doorframe, his captain's uniform soaked with seawater from the lower decks. "Talking to it." I adjusted the beacon frequency, sent another pattern. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Fibonacci sequence. Any intelligence would recognize it. The response came faster this time. The entity continued my sequence. 13, 21, 34. Then added something new. A complex pattern that made my teeth ache, frequencies overlapping in ways our equipment barely registered. Stephanie appeared at my shoulder, her phone out, recording everything. "It's showing us something." The sonar display flickered. Images formed in the static, not from our equipment, but somehow pushed through it. I saw trenches and ridges mapped in impossible detail. Migration patterns of creatures we'd never cataloged. Deep-sea vents connected by networks that spanned entire ocean basins. Current flows tracked across centuries. "Jesus," Charles whispered. "How long has it been watching?" The answer came through the sonar. A slow, measured count. Each pulse was a decade, maybe a century. The count went on and on. I lost track after 200. The entity showed us more. Whales diving deeper than any marine biologist thought possible, guided by songs we couldn't hear. Fish schools moving in response to magnetic fields we'd never mapped. Coral systems connected by chemical signals across thousands of miles. An entire shadow ecosystem thriving in the deep pressure, invisible to our surface observations. It knows more about our oceans than we do. My voice cracked. We'd come down here to steal from it, cut pieces off its home, and it was trying to teach us. The ship groaned. Another compartment collapsed below. We had minutes, maybe less. I looked at the extraction equipment controls. All those samples, that tissue Beverly had freaked out about. The artifacts Storm's team had retrieved on their midnight dive. All of it stolen. All of it causing this. "We have to give it back." The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought. Jackson's voice cut through from the corridor. "Absolutely not. Those samples are priority 1. We're not leaving empty-handed." He pushed past Charles, reached for the beacon controls. I blocked him with my shoulder. "They're defending their home." I kept my body between him and the console. "We give back what we took. Maybe they let us leave." "Stand down, Glass." Jackson's hand went to his jacket pocket. Not sure what he had in there. A weapon, some override device. Didn't matter. Stephanie moved fast. She grabbed the sample containment manifest from the nav station, her fingers flying over the touchscreen. Cargo Bay 3, Sections 7 through 12. All the organic samples are there. "Santiago, you're making a career-ending mistake." Jackson's voice had that dangerous calm I recognized from people used to being obeyed. "Already made it when I helped you lie to everyone." She pulled up the cargo release protocols. "Tucker's right. We give it back or we all die down here." The entity's lights pulsed faster. The water around us started moving in that circular pattern again, building pressure. Warning or countdown, I couldn't tell. I hit the cargo bay release sequence. Override codes flashed red, needed captain's authorization. Charles stepped forward. For a second, I thought he'd side with Jackson. His whole career was military, following orders, chain of command. But he looked out the bridge window at those impossible lights, at his ship dying around us, and entered his command codes. "Do it." The cargo doors opened. I watched on the external cameras as containers tumbled into the black water. Each one lit up as it fell, the entity's bioluminescence tracking them down. The tissue samples, the artifacts, the extracted materials, all of it returning to the deep. I went back to the beacon, sent a new pattern. The same prime number sequence, but backwards, 97, 43, 17. Then added 2 pulses, question and apology, best I could manage. The pressure around the ship eased, the circular currents slowed, the entity's lights dimmed from angry white to softer blue-green. "Storm's team," Beverly's voice came over the intercom, high and scared. "They launched the submersible 5 minutes ago. Storm, Christian, and Hall, they're trying to recover the samples before they sink." My stomach dropped. The idiots had gone down while we were still under attack. "Get them back." Charles grabbed the comm unit. "Emergency recall. All submersibles return immediately." Static. Then Christian's voice, distorted by pressure interference. "Negative bridge. Dr. Hall has command. We're at 200 meters and..." The signal cut to white noise. Through the sonar, I felt more than heard the entity's response. A deep pulse that made my bones ache. The lights below shifted from blue-green to deep red. "They're taking back what we returned." Stephanie's face went pale. "The entity thinks we're trying to steal again." I hammered out patterns on the beacon. "No, stop. Mistake." Tried every combination I could think of. The red lights kept building. On the submersible tracker, their depth showed 300 meters, 400. Descent rate too fast. They were being pulled down. Beverly's scream came through the speakers, not over comms, just her voice from wherever she was on the ship. She knew what was happening. 500 meters, 600. Hull stress warning, submersible 1. The automated system announced it like a weather report. Maximum depth exceeded. I kept signaling, tried to show we weren't all thieves, that some of us wanted to give back what we'd taken. The entity's lights pulsed in response, but the red didn't fade. 800 meters. The submersible's emergency beacon started its death chirp, short bursts that meant the hull was flexing. "Come on." I slammed my fist on the console. "We gave it back. We're trying to..." The tracker went dark. Implosion at depth doesn't leave much. The pressure differential crushes everything in milliseconds. No time to scream, no time to think. Just there, then gone. Beverly's sobs echoed through the ship. Somewhere below, Alexander was probably trying to reach her. The entity's lights shifted back to blue-green, slower now. The warning was over. The punishment delivered. Charles aged 10 years in that moment. His shoulders dropped. His command presence crumbled. 3 more dead because Jackson couldn't let go of his mission. The ship listed another degree. Structural groans came from everywhere now. "Abandoned ship." Charles's voice barely carried. "All hands, abandoned ship." The next 20 minutes blurred together. Emergency stations, life jackets, launch sequences. The entity didn't interfere. Its lights actually seemed to guide us, illuminating the safest water for the lifeboats. I helped Stephanie with her survival suit. Her hands shook too bad to work the zippers. "We tried," she kept saying. "We tried to make it right." The first lifeboat launched with half our remaining crew. I saw Alexander helping Beverly in, her face blank with shock. The boat hit water and immediately moved away from the ship, pushed by currents that shouldn't exist. Charles and I launched the second boat. The Nereid was listing 40 degrees now, her hull plates separating like opening fingers. I looked back once as we cleared the ship's shadow. The entity rose beside the dying vessel, not attacking now, just watching. Its bioluminescence painted the water in patterns I almost understood. Grief maybe, or disappointment. We'd come so close to something incredible and ruined it with greed. The Nereid went down slow. No dramatic Hollywood ending, just water claiming steel piece by piece. The entity's lights followed her down, documenting her descent the same way it had documented everything else in its domain for centuries. In the lifeboat, Charles worked the emergency radio while Stephanie and I watched the lights fade below us. 4 survivors in our boat, 3 in the other. 7 out of 12. "Tucker," Stephanie touched my arm. "The data you recorded, the communication patterns, gone. I'd left everything on the ship. Seemed right somehow. Let them keep their secrets." She nodded, pulled out her phone. The screen was dark, waterlogged despite the protective case. Whatever she'd recorded was lost too. The sun came up 3 hours later. First time I'd seen it in 5 days. The ocean looked different now, knowing what lived beneath it. Every wave might hide wonders we weren't ready to find. Coast Guard found us that afternoon. 2 helicopters, a cutter, full rescue deployment. Charles handled the questions with military precision. Equipment failure, catastrophic hull breach, 7 souls lost at sea. Nothing about entities or underwater cities or first contact gone wrong. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? Ships sink, people die. Ocean keeps its secrets. The last thing I remember before they loaded us on the helicopter was looking down at the water. Smooth as glass, not a trace of what lay beneath. But in the depths, I swear I saw a faint pulse of light. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats. Message received, stay away. You're not ready. Maybe we never would be. They flew us to a naval base. Concrete buildings and chain link fences. Everything painted that particular shade of military gray. Debriefing started immediately. Separate rooms, separate questioners. Mine had a buzz cut and a clipboard. "Tell me what happened to the Nereid." I told him about equipment failure, catastrophic hull breach, how it happened fast, too fast to save everyone. All true, depending on how you defined equipment and what caused it to fail. He wrote everything down, asked about the timeline, the evacuation procedures, who gave what orders. I stuck to facts that wouldn't matter. Yes, Captain Ramos ordered abandoned ship. No, I didn't know why the hull failed. Yes, we followed standard emergency protocols. 4 hours of questions. They brought in lunch, sandwich and chips on a plastic tray. I ate mechanically while the questioner compared notes with someone on the phone. When he came back, he had photos, aerial shots of debris fields, fuel slicks, nothing that looked like a research vessel anymore. "No signs of explosion," he said. "No collision damage on the recovered pieces, just pressure failure." I nodded. Pressure failure covered a lot of possibilities. They released us that evening. Gave us vouchers for a hotel, said someone from the Maritime Board would be in touch about the formal investigation. I shared a taxi with Stephanie. Neither of us spoke during the ride. The hotel room had beige walls and a window facing a parking lot. I sat on the bed and finally let myself think about what we'd found. What had found us? An intelligence that could manipulate water pressure like we use tools. That had been watching our oceans for centuries, maybe longer. Recording whale migrations and deep currents while we were still figuring out fire. It could have killed us all. Crushed the Nereid like a tin can the moment we took those samples. Instead, it tried to teach us. Showed us the shadow ecosystem, the connections we'd never noticed. Even after we stole from it, the entity gave us a chance to make it right. When Jackson tried to take the samples anyway. 5 people, that was the price of our arrogance. I thought about the tissue samples, those impossible cells with their synchronized pulses. Living technology, Jackson had called it. He was right and wrong at the same time. It was life, but not separate from technology. The two concepts merged into something we didn't have words for. My phone buzzed. Text from Charles. "Final reports due next week. Stick to the story." I deleted it. Didn't matter what story we told. The official report would blame metal fatigue or design flaws or human error. They'd find a comfortable explanation that didn't require anyone to rethink what lived in our oceans. The families of the dead would get insurance payouts and folded flags. Life would continue. But I knew different. Stephanie knew. Alexander and Beverly too. We'd carry it, this knowledge that we shared the planet with something ancient and patient and wise enough to hide from us. Something that could end our species' illusion of dominance whenever it chose. The strange thing was, I felt privileged. Not many people get to touch the truth of the world, to see past the thin surface we've all agreed to believe in. The entity had shown us wonders, coral systems talking across thousands of miles, whales diving into pressures that should kill them, an entire biosphere thriving in conditions we called impossible. It had offered to share that knowledge. All we had to do was not be thieves. We'd failed that test, but the entity had still let most of us live. Let us return to our dry world with our dangerous fragment of understanding. Maybe it hoped we'd learn. Maybe it just didn't care enough about us to bother finishing what we'd started. I stood at the hotel window, watching cars move through the parking lot. Normal people living normal lives. Tomorrow they'd read a small article about a research vessel lost at sea. Equipment failure. Tragic accident. They'd forget by the next news cycle. But somewhere beneath the Pacific, in pressures that would crush steel, the entity continued its watch. Recording, observing, waiting. It knew we weren't ready for contact. Might never be ready. So it would stay hidden in the deep places, maintaining the boundaries between our worlds. I'd seen those boundaries, crossed them for a moment. The weight of that knowledge would never leave me. I closed the curtains and lay down on the hotel bed. Tomorrow I'd start the long process of pretending to forget, file my reports, answer official questions with official lies, return to a life where the deepest parts of the ocean stayed properly mysterious and empty of impossible cities. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd remember those lights pulsing in mathematical patterns. Remember cells that defied biology and structures that shouldn't exist. Remember 5 people who paid for our hubris and 7 who lived to carry the secret. The burden and the privilege were the same thing in the end. Knowing that we weren't alone, knowing that we weren't ready, knowing that something watched from the deep places, patient as stone, waiting for us to grow up. Maybe someday we would.